There is no decision in the human experience that is more loaded with guilt, shame, and societal judgment than the decision to cut off one's own family, appearing to the outside world as an act of coldness or rebellion, but appearing from the inside as a desperate act of survival, akin to gnawing off one's own leg to escape a bear trap. Because you have probably seen them, or perhaps you are one of them, the people who dread the holidays, who flinch when someone asks about their parents, and who carry a silence around their childhood that is heavy with things they cannot explain. To speak of it is to invite judgment from a world that is obsessed with the myth of the happy family, and people who cut off their family, specifically their parents or siblings, are rarely doing so out of impulse or anger. Instead, they are usually the most patient people in the family system, the ones who tried the hardest, who forgave the unforgivable, and who stayed long after they should have left, only walking away when they realized that staying would mean the death of their own soul. There is a profound psychology behind this act known as estrangement, which is not an event, but a process, a slow, agonizing realization that the people who were supposed to be your safe harbor are actually the storm, and that the biological bond, which society tells us is sacred, has become a conduit for toxicity that is poisoning your entire existence. To understand the person who leaves, you must first understand the biology of attachment, because we are hardwired by millions of years of evolution to stay close to our caregivers, meaning that the drive to belong to a family is as strong as the drive to breathe. Therefore, when a person severs this tie, they are acting against their own biological programming, overriding a primal instinct which suggests that the pain of staying must have been greater than the terrifying pain of leaving. This decision is often driven by a phenomenon known as the body keeps the score, where the individual's nervous system begins to reject the family system like a pathogen, manifesting as migraines, autoimmune disorders, panic attacks, or chronic fatigue whenever they are near their relatives. Because the body knows what the mind is trying to deny, which is that these people are not safe. For years, the estranged child likely acted as the emotional shock absorber for the family, taking on the anxiety, the rage, and the dysfunction of the parents to keep the peace, realizing eventually that they were being used as a human trash can for everyone else's unaddressed trauma. This dynamic often creates a role known as the identified patient or the scapegoat, where the healthiest person in the sick family is labeled as the crazy one, simply because they refuse to participate in the collective delusion. And you might recognize this if you were the child who pointed out the elephant in the room, who asked why dad was drinking or why mom was crying, and were punished for your perception, being told that you were too sensitive, too difficult, or too dramatic, effectively gaslighting you into believing that your reality was false. This psychological abuse creates a split in the psyche, where the child has to choose between attachment and authenticity, a concept popularized by Dr. Gabor Mate, where the child realizes that to be loved, they must suppress who they are, but to be who they are, they must lose the love of their parents. And for the person who eventually cuts off their family, the cost of suppressing their authenticity became too high, and they chose the terrifying freedom of being themselves over the suffocating safety of being what their family wanted them to be. The process of leaving is rarely a singular, explosive event, although it often ends with one known as the straw that broke the camel's back. But to the family, this final conflict looks trivial, perhaps a forgotten birthday, a rude comment, or a small boundary violation, and they will often say, "She left us over nothing," or "He hasn't spoken to us for years just because of one argument," failing to see that the final event was simply the moment where the reservoir of tolerance ran dry. It was the cumulative weight of 1,000 microaggressions, 1,000 moments of disrespect, and 1,000 betrayals that finally collapsed the bridge, leading the adult child to realize that enough is enough and that no amount of explaining or pleading would ever change the dynamic, because you cannot heal a relationship when you are the only one trying to save it. This decision is made harder by the societal cult of family, which bombards us with messages that family is everything and blood is thicker than water, reinforcing the idea that you owe your parents a relationship simply because they gave you life, regardless of how they treated you during that life, creating a massive burden of guilt for the estranged person who feels like they are breaking a sacred covenant, leading them to question their own sanity and to wonder if they are indeed the bad person that their family claims they are. This guilt is often weaponized by the family, who will use flying monkeys, recruiting aunts, uncles, and cousins to harass the estranged person, to tell them how much they are hurting their mother or how selfish they are being, trying to shame them back into the fold, not because they miss them, but because the family system needs its scapegoat back to function. So the person who leaves is often the cycle breaker, the one who looked at the generational trauma, the alcoholism, the abuse, the silence, the neglect, and said, "It ends with me," realizing that they could not protect their own children or their own future while remaining entangled in the toxicity of the past.
And this act of leaving is therefore an act of profound love, not hate. Love for the self and love for the future generations who will not have to carry the heavy baggage of the ancestors. But the initial phase of estrangement is rarely peaceful. Instead, it feels like a funeral where no one died, involving a specific type of grief known as ambiguous loss, where you are grieving people who are still alive, mourning the relationship you never had and the parents you wished you had but never got. You mourn the fantasy of the happy family that you see in commercials and movies, realizing that you are biologically an orphan, even if your parents are living just a few miles away. And this grief is complicated by the fact that there is no ritual for it, no funeral, no sympathy cards, and no closure, because society does not know how to mourn the voluntary severing of a blood tie, leaving the estranged person to navigate this dark tunnel entirely alone. The silence that follows the cutoff is deafening, and it brings with it a terrifying question: who am I if I am not their child? Forcing the individual to rebuild their identity from scratch without the foundation of family history, which marks the beginning of a new battle known as the smear campaign. Because when a toxic system loses its scapegoat, it goes into a state of panic, realizing that there is no one left to blame for the internal chaos. So, to preserve their own self-image, the remaining family members must rewrite the narrative, painting the person who left as the villain, the unstable one, or the cruel abandoner. You will likely hear stories coming back to you. Stories that twist your reactive abuse, the moments where you finally snapped after years of poking, into evidence of your inherent badness, using your anger as proof of your instability, while conveniently omitting the abuse that caused the anger in the first place, which is a calculated move to isolate you, to ensure that if you ever try to speak your truth, no one will believe you, effectively cutting off your support network and forcing you to question your own reality, a tactic that is often orchestrated by the narcissistic parent who views your independence as a personal insult, a direct attack on their control, and who would rather see you destroyed than see you happy without them. Knowing this does not make the grief of the holidays any easier, because when November and December roll around, the biological imperative to be with kin kicks into overdrive, amplified by a culture that bombards you with images of warm fireplaces and multi-generational dinners, creating a profound sense of exclusion, known as the empty chair, where you might find yourself dreading the season not because you hate celebration, but because the celebration highlights what you do not have, forcing you to navigate the awkward questions from coworkers asking, "What are you doing for Christmas?" and having to come up with a lie because the truth that I am spending it alone to protect my mental health is too heavy for casual conversation.
This solitude can trigger a regression, where you feel like a small, frightened child again, longing for a mother or father who never actually existed, but who lives in your mind as a fantasy, a wish that perhaps this time they will change, perhaps this time they will see me, which is the core of the mother wound or the father wound, the deep psychological scar left by a parent who was physically present but emotionally absent or dangerous, leaving the child with a core belief that they are fundamentally unlovable. Because if the person who made you cannot love you, then who can? Healing this wound requires grieving the death of hope, the acceptance that they will never be who you need them to be, and that waiting for them to change is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. Allowing you to stop auditioning for their love, to stop performing for an empty theater, and to take the energy you were wasting on them and pour it back into yourself. But this creates a temporary void, a vacuum where the validation used to be. You become hyper-independent, a trauma response where you refuse to need anyone, where you view dependency as a trap, because your early experiences taught you that every gift comes with strings, and every offer of help is a transaction. So you become the person who never asks for anything, who solves every problem alone, and who isolates when they are hurting because it is safer to suffer in silence than to risk the weaponization of your vulnerability. Making romantic relationships incredibly difficult because you attract partners who need saving or partners who are emotionally unavailable, reenacting the childhood dynamic where you have to work for love, where you have to earn your place at the table. You might find yourself in a cycle of repetition compulsion, dating versions of your mother or father, hoping that this time you can fix them, this time you can make them love you and thereby retroactively heal the childhood wound. But the only way to break the cycle is to stop dating potential and start dating reality. To recognize that love should be boringly safe, not excitingly dangerous, requiring a complete recalibration of your nervous system, which has mistaken anxiety for chemistry for your entire life. Teaching yourself that peace is not boredom, it is safety, and that a partner who is consistent and kind is not suspicious, they are healthy. Furthermore, the physical toll of cutting off family cannot be overstated, because trauma is stored in the body, in the fascia, in the muscles, and in the gut. So when you finally cut the cord, you might experience a period of physical collapse, where you get sick, where you sleep for 14 hours a day, or where you have unexplainable pains because your body has been running on adrenaline for decades, holding a defensive posture against your own kin. And now that the threat is gone, the exhaustion sets in, which is the somatic release, the body finally putting down the shield, letting go of the tension that was necessary for survival in a war zone, but is no longer needed in peacetime, requiring you to treat yourself with extreme gentleness during this phase, regarding yourself as a recovering patient, because you are recovering from a lifetime of emotional radiation poisoning.
And you will also have to navigate the guilt of relief, the confusing sensation of feeling happy that they are not in your life, while simultaneously feeling like a bad person for being happy about it. Catching yourself laughing or enjoying a quiet Sunday morning, and then suddenly feeling a pang of guilt as if you are betraying them by being okay without them, because they trained you to believe that your happiness was dependent on their approval. But this guilt is a lie, a phantom limb sensation from a relationship that was amputated for your survival, and you must learn to talk back to it, to remind yourself that you are allowed to be happy, you are allowed to be free, and you do not owe your life to the people who gave it to you, if they tried to take your spirit in exchange. The journey also involves dealing with hoovering, a tactic used by toxic families to suck you back in, often occurring after a period of silence where they will suddenly reach out with a generic message like "thinking of you" or "happy birthday," acting as if nothing happened, refusing to acknowledge the conflict or the reasons you left, which is not an olive branch, it is a test, a way to see if your boundaries are still up, to see if you have forgotten the pain enough to come back to the slaughterhouse. But you must remember that contact without change is just a reset button for the abuse cycle, allowing them to pick up right where they left off without taking any accountability for the past. Eventually, you reach a state of radical acceptance, where you stop trying to explain yourself to people who are committed to misunderstanding you, where you stop trying to win the trial in the court of public opinion, and you simply walk away from the courthouse entirely, realizing that your peace is more valuable than your reputation, and that it is better to be the villain in their story than the victim in your own. Finding a strange solace in being the bad guy, if being the bad guy means being the one who survived. You start to build your own traditions, your own rituals that are free from the stain of the past, reclaiming the holidays, reclaiming your birthday, and reclaiming your life, realizing that you are not a branch that has been cut off from the tree and is destined to wither. You are a seed that has been carried by the wind to new soil, where you can finally grow without being overshadowed. Ultimately, the journey of the estranged is a journey of alchemy, where you take the lead of your trauma and transmute it into the gold of wisdom, finding that the empty space left by your biological family becomes a fertile ground for a new kind of growth, leading you to understand the concept of chosen family, which is the profound realization that biology is the least important ingredient in a relationship, and that true family is defined by loyalty, respect, and safety, not by DNA, allowing you to collect people who see you, who hear you, and who love you without condition, realizing that the bond of water that is shared by choice is often thicker than the blood of the covenant that is shared by obligation. You start to attract friends, mentors, and partners who mirror the health you are building rather than the dysfunction you left behind, creating a circle of support that stands as a fortress around your peace, proving that you were never unlovable, you were simply surrounded by people who did not know how to love, requiring you to engage in the deep work of reparenting, where you become the mother and the father to yourself that you never had, treating your inner child with the tenderness and protection that was denied to you, learning to soothe your own anxiety, to validate your own feelings, and to celebrate your own victories without waiting for external applause. You realize that the silence you have chosen is not an act of aggression, but an act of preservation, a sacred boundary that says, this far and no further. And while the world may judge you for walking away, you know that the bravest thing a person can do is to refuse to pass the poison down to the next generation, making you the cycle breaker, the one who stood on the fault line of generational trauma and absorbed the earthquake, so that your children and your children's children would stand on solid ground. While you may carry the scars of that earthquake, you also carry the immense strength of having survived it. So you stop looking back at the burning bridge and start looking forward at the open road, realizing that you are not a victim of your history, you are the author of your future, and you have the pen in your hand. So take a deep breath and forgive yourself for saving your own life. Forgive yourself for choosing peace over performance, and forgive yourself for outgrowing the pot you were planted in. Because you are not alone in this exile. There is a vast tribe of survivors walking this same path, people who have traded the false comfort of a toxic home for the terrifying beauty of freedom, and who have found that on the other side of the guilt lies a life that is finally, fully, and unapologetically yours. You made the hard choice, the impossible choice, and in doing so, you honored the most important relationship you will ever have, the relationship with your own soul. So keep walking forward, keep building your chosen family, and know that you are whole, you are worthy, and you are free.